Hey, good morning, everyone.
Morning. How's everybody doing? See, Troy, you're in Pennsylvania. I am away from home. I'm out here in Ontario, California, beautiful Ontario, uh, for the U.S. Compost Council Conference. It's a much bigger. I don't know, Troy, if you're familiar with this conference, or I know you're familiar with USCC, but
Yeah,
it's a much. You look at the equipment here, and it just is the scale is absolutely massive. I mean, these are literally $1 million pieces of equipment at this trade show, and these massive scale. It's probably no reason for me to be out here other than being one of the few worm people that's actually at the conference. Um, but it's a good reason to drink beer with some buddies like Francisco and meeting some new friends here in our Airbnb from Brazil and Mexico. And so anyway, we'll enough blabber for me. We'll let everybody check in. We got Art is here on YouTube, K Borum from Missouri checking in. Looks like he's got a little snow out there. Ryan, we got Scott Hagara from Northeast Ohio. I'm from Central Ohio, Scott, right off of I-71. We used to pick our dog up off of she used to go out to the rest area on I-71. We'd pick her up. She'd go get fed by whoever out there. So we had to a couple times have to go out to the rest area to pick my dog up from there. Got Landon checking in from Columbia, South Carolina.
Alabama.
Go Gamecocks. Alabama. Kim in New Hope, PA. Kim, my wife's grandmother was she had a house right there on Main Street, just a walking distance. It was right. She was in between the canal and the river. Just a beautiful. I forget the address, but just a beautiful little home there in New Hope. Man, Cape Cod, Kansas. We got Becky from Chattanooga. Awesome. Let's see, who do we miss? We got Susan here. She's our every year or every week from Texas. She's with Misfit Farms, another small upcoming worm farm. Got Kim, Kim, our New Hope person there. Philly rocks. Yes, they do. The Eagles are doing awesome. Got Kevin in Naperville. Good to see you again, Kevin. Cool. And my buddy Ivan from Hong Kong. I actually met Ivan in Hong Kong. I was out there and sourcing. I was out there at a conference trying to find some new sourcing stuff for Urban Worm Company. Ended up really not sourcing anything new. That's kind of when I decided I wanted to source as little as possible from China. But went down and met Ivan. We had dinner. What a wonderful city that is. I hope it stays that way. So yeah. Susan from Los Angeles. So cool. So this is just, I think, just to set this up, everybody. This is going to be somewhat of a short one, a little bit of a niche topic. I think we're trying to keep these, as I say in the military, with the military briefings, faster and funnier. So we'll get through these things, have some nice snappy topic to cover, and then get to the Q&A, which I think is really, really helpful for everybody. So before we get into it, though, just would love everybody, if you're just stumbling across us here on YouTube or on Facebook, we would love for you to subscribe on YouTube. That's the more subscribers we get, the more YouTube starts to promote the channel. And so I think we're doing something good here with YouTube, and it's really a platform we're trying to lean into this year. So if you're not subscribed on YouTube, love to have you go hit that button, as the kids say. So anyway, Troy, you want to just go ahead and get into it? We're going to talk about fungi in the worm bin, which is something I know precious little about. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, I will jump right in here. I'm going to get this, our little banner taken down real quick.
Okay.
And then we'll skip ahead here. So yeah, today we're going to talk about fungi for worm bins and compost piles. So I didn't want to, you can use this either for worm bins or compost piles. So we're going to go through saprophytic fungi, where to find it, how to collect it, and then adding it to your worm bin. So we'll get into all the good juicy details amongst those slides. And I'm in my new house. I've got a new house, and I'm sort of in limbo right now. So that's why I have a stocking cap on and I'm not as well lit. I forgot my little special light. So I'm just kind of in between things. So keeping up with everything. All right. So what is saprophytic fungi and what is the point of any of this anyway? For one thing, when we're keeping, especially when we're keeping a worm bin, we are adding ingredients like cardboard, wood chips, food scraps, and things like that, which are going to have some microorganisms already on their surfaces. But generally, when we're making like regular compost outside, we've got that compost on the soil. And so soil microorganisms and worms and things like that are able to migrate into that pile. And we've got things out in the air and out in the open. So we've got spores and bacteria that are blowing in and covering all of this organic matter. So when we're putting things in a worm bin, we're kind of closing that off from the world, and we've got a very enclosed microclimate there. So it's good to add some other native wild microorganisms in there to help get things going in our worm bin, so we don't just have those things from our banana peels and avocado skins and things like that. So one other quick note is that mostly what we're adding into the bin when we're focusing on a worm bin is a lot of bacteria. So we've got a good amount of bacteria that we're adding in there, but we're not going to be adding things in that are going to really help the fungi to break down the brown material in our bin. And so that's why I'm focusing on this saprophytic fungi, because this stuff is going to help to break down the browns in our bin. So saprophytic fungi are when you see the fruiting bodies of mushrooms a lot of times in the woods, those are going to be saprophytic fungi. They're decomposing dead and decaying tissue. So once a stick or log or leaves fall down to the ground, these fungal hyphae are going to move up from the soil and move into this tissue and start to decompose and break those down. So they are going to work on the browns or carbonaceous material in our compost bins. And a lot of people are familiar with these types of fungi or mushrooms, especially because when you're eating edible mushrooms, pretty much any edible mushroom that you're going to get from someone who's growing mushrooms are going to be a type of saprophytic fungi. So they're using a substrate and inoculating it, colonizing that substrate and growing mushrooms off of that. So moving on to the next slide. So when I say that this saprophytic fungi breaks down dead or decaying woody matter, the best place to find it is going to be with dead and decaying woody matter or leaf tissue. So I try to get as local as possible. If you're able to just walk outside your door and go to a woods, or drive half a mile or a couple miles away to somewhere that you can collect something from the wild, it's going to be the best to get it to as close to you as possible, because you're going to get not only fungi but other types of bacteria and organisms that are going to survive in your climate and do well in your climate. So going to a woody area, a forest, you're not really supposed to take things from parks, so it's going to be best to try to get it from private land. You can just go under the leaf litter layer or the duff in a forest, especially closer to trees, or like you can see in this picture here, I'm near a downed log. So when you have a downed log, you are for sure at some point going to have fungi coming in and moving in from the soil to break that down. So looking around near sticks and leaves and things like that. Or even a wood chip pile. So if you've got a big wood chip pile out back, you're likely to have at some point some saprophytic fungi growing up into that. So if you ever pick up a handful of your wood chips and have all this white mycelium on there, that's going to be saprophytic fungi. So, you could use that as well. And basically what we're doing is collecting an inoculant that we're grabbing some of that and going to put it into our worm bin. I had a good video, but it was hard to bring through. So basically what I'm doing is just this little flyer. So if this is the leaf litter layer and this is the soil layer, I'm just kind of picking up that leaf litter layer, looking for white mycelium underneath the bottoms of those leaves or on sticks. And then I'm just grabbing a handful of those leaves and even a little bit of soil at the top there. It's good to not take too much in one place. So maybe just a couple handfuls here, go look somewhere else close by and get a couple more handfuls. And it really doesn't take much, for an urban worm bag. You'd really just need maybe 4 or 5 handfuls, if that, because these things are going to take off and work on the food materials in the bin. So then this is basically what I was just saying. Pick up the leaf litter layer, look for this, see that white tissue there. If you see white cobweb-like stuff that's grown together, that's going to be saprophytic mycelium. Grab a handful of the leaves, even little twigs. And I said, again, the soil. So those top few inches of soil, that's where this fungi came from. So you can even grab a little bit of that. And then you really just don't want to overdo it. Not that you can fill your bin up with too much stuff. It's that you are just don't want to be robbing that forest floor of too much of its resources. So what I do is I take a bucket. I'll just take one of my 3-gallon buckets or take a 5-gallon bucket out into the woods, collect some handfuls, and then bring it back to my worm bin or my compost pile. And that brings us to the next slide. And then in your worm bin, these microorganisms need moisture to survive. So if you can imagine putting them on top of your worm bin, there's going to be a lot of airflow there where they're not going to be touching moisture. You don't want it to dry out. So it's good to bury it very shallowly for the purpose of getting this stuff to touch other material in the bin, so then it can migrate onto those surfaces. And it's also going to get the moisture from the surrounding organic matter that you're burying it next to. So I'll just take my pile, pull a little bit aside, stick a handful in there, cover it up, move over a foot or so, make a little shallow indentation, put that in there, cover it up with some stuff, and then just let it go. So again, as I was mentioning, we're collecting saprophytic fungi. That saprophytic fungi is going to help to break down woody, brown matter, carbon, cardboard, paper, all those things. But along with that, you're also going to be getting other bacteria and things like that. So anytime anybody has a tumbler or something like that, some type of composting system that's not touching the earth, I always recommend them to add a few handfuls of even just soil, because you're not getting those good microbes that are in the soil that you're wanting to break down this material. And then I've got a really good picture. So I had built a 4x8, 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, 1 feet deep worm bin, and filled it up, or slowly filled it up with food waste and leaves and cardboard. And I would keep it covered with this giant piece, keep it covered. I don't know if I said the wrong word there. Keep it covered with a giant piece of cardboard to keep the moisture in. And I had collected handfuls of native saprophytic fungi, inoculated my bin with that. And as you can see here in the picture, this is a twig that's that tiny, and it's had mycelium on it. It had fungi from the forest on it, and it grabbed hold of that cardboard. And now that piece of twig is stuck to the cardboard, and that mycelium is spreading outward, growing onto the cardboard, and it'll just keep going and going and going, slowly turning that cardboard into soil. So this right here is showing you exactly why we're wanting to do that, because then you're getting this good fungi that's going to spread out, grow onto other materials in your bin. And so you're going to help get really good breakdown of your brown carbonaceous material, but you're also going to get really good worm casting. So most people who have gotten into the soil food web understand the importance of fungi in the soil and are trying to create composts that are more fungal. And this is one way that you're going to get compost that is more fungal, is by adding this good saprophytic fungi from your native soils. So that's about all I got. I'm sure there's going to be a good amount of questions with that. And with that, we will move on to the Q&A, and I will take down this screen.
Okay. I know I have a couple things. This is a little bit of the fungi aspect of it is a little bit of a blind spot for me. But one of the things that this keeps bringing into kind of bringing into focus for me is that adding these fungi by itself doesn't do the trick. You need the things for the fungi to continue to flourish, which is high carbonaceous material. And that's a thing that most new vermicomposters don't do. They'll start with bedding, and then they may just only add food waste. And so if that's you, as you're watching this, just know you've got to keep adding the carbon to your worm bin. It's not just about starting with that carbon base layer and then adding just food waste after it. Otherwise, these fungi need that carbon in order to break down, and your worm bin needs that carbon in order to balance out not just the pH, but it needs to absorb moisture. It needs to maintain that carbon to nitrogen ratio that is going to make sure that things don't get just rotten and absolutely stinky in your worm bin. So you can't really have too much bedding. So it's very important to keep adding carbon rich materials to your bin. So I imagine if you're watching this, you've heard me say it again and again. You've got to add that carbon to your worm bin. The one thing I'll say about this, that if you're doing an indoor worm bin, you are very likely to be importing other critters from nature into your bin. And so if you've got like one of these, indoor bins where it's somewhat exposed or in somewhat close proximity to other people that you're living with, just know that you may end up bringing in things like mites and roly-polies and springtails and other things that are honestly good composters. They're a great part of an ecosystem, but this is a either good, or it depends on your perspective. You are going to be importing these into your bin. So with that, Bobby's asking a question here that actually I've answered a couple times this week about using pine shavings, wood shavings in a bin. So people have asked me a lot about. For some reason, I've gotten a lot of questions this week about sawdust. Sawdust gives you a lot of carbon, but I believe it gives you a very small particle size, so it can mat and compact very easily. You should have some sawdust and shavings are probably what he's talking about, which are going to be a little bit bulkier. I think yes, you can, Bobby. Some people have asked about cedar. Cedar is probably not the best. I know you're not asking that, Bobby, but people are asking about cedar, and cedar has a kind of antimicrobial properties, which is why it's used for a lot of outdoor applications. So I don't know if cedar's the best, but do you have any opinions, Troy, on pine, on pine shavings versus any other sort of wood?
I think that pine's absolutely fine. And the other thing that I wanted to mention, I know you normally bring it up, is that sawdust, you would think that sawdust would break down very easily, but once you make it sawdust, it actually makes it have a extremely high carbon to nitrogen ratio. And that high carbon to nitrogen ratio is what makes things hard to break down, which is also why cedar is hard to break down, because it has an extremely high carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you have to beware of using sawdust for that reason as well, because you would think that small particle size is just going to break down right away, but actually it's going to stick around for a long time.
I want to get to Steve's question here on YouTube, and then we'll get to Kevin on YouTube as well. But Steve was asking about green cedar. Is green cedar any different than cedar? The kind of more the red cedar that I'm used to seeing?
I don't know the answer to that. I would think it would have a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio because it's green and younger. And there would be less of carbon material, but I packed in there. I honestly don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to give an incorrect answer.
Sure. Kevin was asking about using brewer's grains, and so this is the thing I actually have the most experience with is using spent brewer's grains. Spent brewer's grains are an excellent input. We used a lot of carbon. Basically, I'll just tell you, Kevin, what we used when we were doing composting and vermicomposting here is we would bring in basically a ton of this stuff at a time, and we would take 7 5-gallon buckets, which is 35 gallons, and then 2 large wheelbarrows full of wood chips and mix them together. I actually think we underdid it on the carbon there. Those brewer's grains are very, very potent, so you need just a lot of You just need a lot of carbon, a lot of wood chips in there to offset those brewer's grains. The one feedback that I've gotten by somebody that has done a lot of composting with brewer's grains is that it's a very very oxygen hungry nitrogen food source in a sense in a bin. So I forget what she said. It was it's very high bio demand uh, uh, input material, which means it can go anaerobic very, very quickly as the microbes that break that stuff down are just consuming all sorts of oxygen. And we had some anaerobic issues with the pre-composting process. So I would just say, try to overdo it a little bit. If err on the side of too much carbon there, Kevin, if you're talking about doing spent brewer's grains. Cool. What else we have? We got, let's see here.
Somebody asked about, they have culinary mushroom media. This is a great question. I have some used up culinary mushroom media from a mushroom kit, 6x8 cubes. How do I best add this block to my worm bin? So I do this myself. A lot of people are really getting into growing mushrooms at home. You can get these little kits. That's a little block that you grow your own oyster mushrooms or whatever like that, which is a saprophyte. And so you would just take that cube and take it and crumble it up into your hand, and I would just spread it out evenly across your bin. I mean, you can toss the whole thing, and if you wanted, it's going to be a lot easier to break down if you crumble it up there. And you may even notice that it might start to take off, and you'll have some more mycelium growing because it grabs onto those foods in your bin.
Keith is asking about slugs. Are slugs in a worm bin a good or a bad thing? I'm hearing of people that get all sorts of slugs, and I don't have them. I don't have any. It doesn't seem like something that would proliferate, but evidently they reproduce rather quickly. I know we've got a blog post, and Troy, maybe I'll tell you what. If you want to handle this, I'll go ahead and post that blog post that people can read about worm bin pests and problems. I don't think slugs by themselves are bad in a worm bin. Troy, is that no. Does that jive with you?
Right. Yeah, they're generally not harmful to worms. There are a few species in tropical areas that can harm worms. Somebody I had been messaging with, and they might be in the audience right now. I think they're banana slugs. They're some type of little yellow slugs, and I might be wrong on the name. But yeah, I looked those up, and they can be harmful to worms. But most of the ones that you see are probably not going to be harmful, but they're easy to grab and set out away from your bin.
Okay. So Perry, I don't know if we're going to be able to answer this question, but he's creating an aquaponics system, and would the fish wastewater with ammonia levels, I don't know if that's high ammonia levels, be good for a worm bin? Perry, in most cases, you shouldn't need to add much water at all to a worm bin. So I wouldn't use it because of the water, not because of the possible ammonia levels, but I would imagine it would be fine if you needed to use it in small quantities. But the stuff most people are putting into a worm bin is such high water content already when it comes to especially things like food waste that you shouldn't need much water application. So I wouldn't be dumping this stuff into a bin. Colby is I'm seeing more and more of this these days. Predatory hammerhead worms in his garden. Can they become a problem in a worm bin or a windrow? This is one of those few things that actually is a problem. These are what planarians, I believe that they're called, and yep. they will prey on earthworms. So if you find them, I would just take them, and I even think if you cut them in half, they will become two worms, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Troy, but I think you just want to take these things and crush them.
Yeah. I believe that either the larger part that you cut in half only, grows back, but the smaller half doesn't. I'm not sure about that. That's my recollection. They do eat worms, but it's not like if you get one in your worm bin that it's going to like be mass hysteria where they're just like gobbling up every worm, every minute. It's like I think they eat like one a week. So it's not like they're going to wipe out your worm population if you happen to get them in your worm bin. I'm not saying that's not a problem, but if you happen to see one, you don't need to like freak out, but I would definitely remove it and probably kill it, so that you're not dealing with it somewhere else.
Okay. Jeff, we've got a couple people talking about spiders. I don't think spiders are going to be predatory on worms. I can't imagine you enjoy having spiders in a worm bin. I think some people do. I don't love all nature, just let's get that out there. That I do not like spiders or snakes, but I don't think that the spiders in a worm bin would be a problem. Jeff asks an easy one. Jeff Coons is asking about cardboard. Do you find shredding it versus tearing it up a box is any better? I like shredding it. If you've got a crosscut shredder, I would use a crosscut shredder. Obviously, these things are typically meant for paper. So if you use a crosscut shredder or if you use a shredder for cardboard, I would make sure that it's at the very least an 8-sheet shredder, preferably a 12-sheet. We have a 12-sheet crosscut shredder, and it works great for cardboard. Let's see. Or Alan is asking about malt barley, a brewer's grain. I don't know if that. I know that people make beer and beverages with malt barley. I don't know if I consider that a brewer's grain. The brewer's grain I'm talking about is stuff that comes right out of. It's really wet. It's the stuff that they just had in these big urns that they're brewing. Yeah, the mash stuff. So I don't know how to answer that. I'm going to default to say yes. If anybody else knows, I mean, people brew with it, but I don't know if that's typically what we were always getting was a barley. In fact, I think it actually was. So, Alan, not to spend too long on this, I think that is safely considered a brewer's grain. The stuff we use is spent, though. It's after the brewing process. Kevin's asking about
treated the same way.
What's that?
Even if it's not the same, or if it is the same, it should just be treated the same way as a green input added with brown input. Yeah.
Right. Kevin's asking about mushrooms versus fungi. And so mushrooms are fungi, Kevin. So you would want to just go ahead and I would keep those in if you've got them sprouting in a bin, and we certainly have. I'd just leave them in there. I wouldn't pull them. So they're doing their job, and that, expressing it through that saprophytic action there. So yeah, I would not pull them. I would just let them do their work in there.
I was just going to add real quick for everybody, so a mushroom is the fruiting body of these saprophytic fungi, and the whole purpose of that is for reproduction, because as you get that mushroom, those are full of spores. The mushroom puts out spores. Those are babies. So it's its way of having babies. So you're just adding more spores into your bin. That's going to help more, unless you want to eat the mushrooms.
Yeah. Bruce or Jeff asked about a preferred shredder to use. I just have the Amazon Basics 12-sheet shredder. That does a great job. That's crosscut. You just make sure that it's crosscut. Bruce is asking about fish entrails and in a worm bin, and you do not want that. You want, especially in a home worm bin, no meat, very little dairy, if any. I would not use that at all. Thank you. So yeah, fish entrails, I would definitely not. One thing you can use to eat the fish entrails would be black soldier fly larvae, which I'm not really an expert in, but if you want to look further into that there, Bruce, they would eat fish. In fact, there is a cool YouTube video of black soldier fly larvae eating 2 large fish. I'm talking big salmon that are in this bin, and they're gone. They're down to the bone within, I believe, 4 hours. Maybe 6 hours. They're just gone. They just consume this stuff. It's pretty crazy. So let's see. This is a fairly common one. Jay asks about pineapple. If it's okay to put in the worm bin. He said he keeps reading mixed reviews. The one thing I've heard with pineapple is it contains an enzyme that worms may not like. But I think if you're not using it as a primary, like you're dumping a whole lot of pineapple into a worm bin, I think you'd be fine. With all things, moderation is key. What input do you have on pineapple there in a bin, Troy?
I think it's going to be kind of the same thing as citrus, where it's going to be more acidic that the worms might not like it. But once those microorganisms get rid of that and break it down, the worms, it'll be fine. And normally you don't have a ton of pineapple skin.
Okay. Sherry's asking about coffee. Do you need to compensate with extra cardboard or paper? You know, coffee. I don't think you need to compensate any more or less with coffee in a worm bin. The one thing that makes coffee a bit of a different food waste is you do probably, if you do use a lot of coffee, and we do, just with our home bin, is you need to that stuff can tend to dry out a worm bin. It just acts like a big, sponge for water. So you probably would need to add a little more water than you would with other types of food waste. But as far as the coffee itself, it's pH neutral. No need to worry about like buffering. The spent coffee grounds, I should say, are pH neutral. So I don't think that there's anything special you need to do. Sherry asked about starting to get a little bit moldy, kind of sitting in the indoor container. I don't think that that's a problem. You can just add that. You don't need to remove the moldy part. It's gonna work itself out just fine. Sherry asked about avocado skins. You can put them in there. They will not break down quickly. They're just very kind of fibrous, and it'll just take a long time to break down. But the worms are going to love the little eating up the little meat from inside the avocado skin if you've left any in there. So what else does anybody have here? I feel like we're kind of handling these fairly rapid fire. You guys got any questions about any goodness, large scale stuff, business stuff, composting, soil biology? One thing that we offer, and I'm very bad about putting this out there, is we do offer a soil biology test. I call it glamour shots for your soil, because Troy will take your worm castings or your compost or your soil. We'll have you fill out a questionnaire first to learn more about it, learn what you're using it for. And then we'll send you a sample bag, and then Troy will put it under a microscope, take some pictures with it, and say, here's what I found. It's a very qualitative sort of test, as opposed to some of the quantitative tests that you see with places like Earthfort. But this is sort of a cheaper version of Earthfort with, I think, a bit of a better visual presentation. If you are interested in what your castings look like, Troy can put them under a microscope, and you can just go to our website and look for services there. So real fast, Landon asks, how do I contact you for business consulting? Landon, you can email me at steve@urbanwormcompany.com. It's going to be a very busy time of year. I'll just warn you. And I do offer kind of some hourly consulting on business development on the site. So, all right, enough about that. Let's see.
Someone asked about tea bags.
Tea bags, yeah.
Tea bags are a really 50-50 thing, because some of them are made out of all natural materials, which it's totally fine, but yet they may have a staple in there. Whereas I'm not caring too much about a staple, because the metal is going to rust and it's going to break down and provide minerals to the soil. Some people don't want that metal in their compost. But a lot of tea bags, you wouldn't be aware of it, but they're made out of actually a plastic mesh, and so they're not going to break down. But you could definitely empty the contents of that tea bag into your worm bin. Somebody asked about how to use worm castings to amend old potting soil. We had a whole live stream on how to use worm castings. If you want to check out that video, I think it was in December, possibly November, not too long ago. But you could mix in 20% worm castings to the old potting soil. Short answer.
Okay. Carl asks, and Carl, I'm going to give you the best answer I can, but after 6 months, my first harvest, he's got the first harvest of the urban worm bag in a couple weeks. How much volume can he expect to remove, having started with 1 pound of red wigglers? I'm not sure, Carl. What I will tell you is I believe it's Carl Borum. I would expect to get probably several gallons. I would look for about 2 gallons, but understand that your first harvest may include a lot of unprocessed bedding, because the worms may not necessarily be working that stuff from bottom to top in the beginning. So you're going to add like a nice 8-inch layer and then start adding food waste. The worms may never actually have gotten down to the bottom of that base bedding layer. So you may end up getting a lot of stuff that you recognize as still bedding. Just go ahead and put that stuff in the top, and then I would come back and harvest again maybe 2 to 3 weeks later. And you should see more of that stuff turning into worm castings and being a much more homogeneous kind of granular type of material. Let's see here.
I would always say your
Betty
first
about
harvest is going to be a bit more chunkier than all the following harvests.
right. Yep. It's the first harvest is a little bit disappointing for a lot of people. It's often the third one when you're finally like, okay, I've got this. So, I think Carmen asked, what's the issue in shipping to Canada? Carmen, we can do it. It's just expensive for us to do it. We are about to change the rates on our website for shipping to Canada because we were able to get with FedEx and get a much better rate from our warehouse. We can certainly ship to Canada. It's just expensive, and sometimes, and it doesn't happen all the times, you risk getting having to pay a tariff as it crosses the border. A lot of our shipments get through without anybody having to pay anything extra, but sometimes they do. So I'm assuming, Carmen, you're talking about shipping like something like the urban worm bag or coconut core, some sort of inert material. What I will tell you is that you cannot ship worms, and I believe we can ship worm castings from the U.S. into Canada, but we cannot ship worms. It's just a USDA. It's livestock. It's sort of like you can't bring in, foreign foods and foreign animals and stuff like that. Even though there are already worms in Canada, they will not let us do that. Let's see. Do you see the thing, Troy, from Jess and Bean about hypoaspis? Do you see that?
Yeah.
What is that? Educate us all, please.
It's a type of mite. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know that particular one. Okay. I imagine that you're just saying it's helping to shred down things in their compost bin and in their potting plant.
Yeah. So she said that they are a fungus gnat predator. So that would be good, because fungus gnats are really the fungus gnats appear to be kind of like fruit flies, except they're kind of blacker and darker and a little more hardy. It's a little tougher to get rid of fungus gnats as it is fruit flies. So if the mites do it, then great. Of course, now you've got another bug that you weren't expecting in your worm bin. But again, they're also good composters and good shredders, like Troy was talking about.
When someone mentioned spiders, I was going to mention that it's likely that there's some type of flies around there that's why they have spiders, because there's a food source for them, obviously.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, these are big ecosystems. That's the thing, is a lot of people start out, they think they're only going to get worms, eating carbon and nitrogen, like, oh, I'm only going to put bedding, food waste, and worm. That's the only thing that's going to be in there. No, you're creating this very hospitable ground for all sorts of critters, and of course you're going to be breeding microbes, right? But you're going to have all sorts of other things, those other soil food web characters that show up to the party. Miko asks, how much does it cost to send a sample to Troy to test? Troy, we can do that for $150. What's going to happen is an order comes through, and then we will send you a self-addressed, we'll send you an envelope with another envelope in it with a bag, and you will just send that to Troy, and then he'll put it under a microscope, do up a report, and send it out to you. And what I really like about this test, Miko, is that Troy's, one of the things on the questionnaire is, what are you using these for? Because if you're growing if you're growing something that needs something more fungal, and Troy notices a very, very bacterially dominated vermicompost or other compost, then he's going to make some recommendations for what you can do to make your vermicompost more appropriate for the crop that you're growing. And that's the thing I feel like we don't get out of other tests. They just throw numbers at you. We try to give you some numbers, but then give you more, like, here's what you should do going forward to change up your processes to make your castings better for you. Not better for everybody else, but better for you and what you want to use them for.
I don't think that you mentioned the correct price.
Is it not one? Is it 125?
Correct. Yeah, that's what's
okay. It's 125. All right. Good. If you want to pay us 150, go ahead. Yeah.
Perry asks, would growing mushrooms in your worm bin be good? I would not say so. So in nature, you've got a balance where in the soil, you've got fungi here, you've got worms here, and you've got the yin and the yang that they're all able to do together. But when you're trying to grow mushrooms, you're trying to have a monoculture of something, and you're trying to get it to take over all of the substrate. So if you've got mycelium, it's called mycelium running onto new material, you're trying to get that mycelium to run into your substrate, but then you'd have worms that are chewing through that material. So you would be fighting against each other. So no, it would not be a good thing. But like the person asked before, it is an excellent food source for old spent substrate. Spent mushroom blocks are an excellent food source for mushrooms because they've got nematodes and protozoa in there. It's just full of that stuff that the worms love to munch on and get nutrition from.
Cool. This is an interesting one, probably right up your alley.
Yeah.
About the oxygen. I'll read it. Hey, Gustav. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, vermicompost oxygenated extracts have a pH of 8.5. Do I need to lower the pH before watering plants? I want to ask Troy, is that even true that extracts would have a higher pH than that? Or
well, it's all going to be dependent on your compost. Your water, I mean, you maybe want to check your water pH beforehand, and I'm sure you probably do if you're testing that much. I don't ever focus on pH because it's going to fluctuate so much. It's not important to me. And the biology is going to really dictate the pH. So when you're making a compost tea brew or compost extract, you're getting bacteria going. And so bacteria are going to create a bit more of an alkaline environment. So that's why you could have a little bit of a higher pH reading. But I would say that it's going to fluctuate. And it shouldn't, and no, it shouldn't be an issue if you're having a little bit higher pH, because it should just be a matter of the biology that's in there.
Yeah. Sherry asks if she's almost ready to harvest for the first time. If you can advise, should she sift, throw worms and food stuff back in, and add more coconut coir? So Sherry, if you're using the urban worm bag, if you've managed the moisture correctly, you should not really have worms in your harvest. You may have a few that you have to pick out, a few stragglers down there. If it's another more batch method of vermicomposting, like with a bucket, then you could take all that you separate the castings. This is a whole nother episode, and we've done actually episodes on harvesting, and I would actually go look at that one. But worms, cocoons, and undigested stuff go right back into the next bin, because all you're really looking for is the castings. And you could add more coconut coir to your question. Coconut coir is one of those things I feel like is better to use to maybe start up a worm bin than it is an existing worm bin. Coconut coir, we sell coconut coir, but I don't want to tell people they need coconut coir all the time. I look at coconut coir as sort of like a starter log for a campfire. You don't need that starter log again if you've already got the fire going. So if you've already got a lot of bacteria, the thing I like about coconut coir is just sort of breaks down, it's already a soil-like texture, and it sort of breaks down relatively quickly. But if you've already got the bacteria working on other things that are going to work on the paper and cardboard, the stuff that may need a little bit more time to break down, I don't think you actually need more coconut coir. I would just put more paper in there. Kevin is asking about how often to harvest, and I presume he's talking about the urban worm bag. I have people that harvest once a week. I have some people that harvest once every 2 months. I tend to stay on the much less frequent harvests. Obviously, if you're harvesting more frequently, there's a few things that govern this. One, how much are you harvesting? If you're only taking out a little bit, then sure, you can harvest every week. It also depends on what you're harvesting and how long it takes to break down. One of the things I love that people use is leaf mold, which is just broken down leaves, kind of like what Troy was talking about, just a whole lot of that stuff. If you're doing that, you can harvest a lot and harvest fairly frequently, because the worms are only finishing off that material. They're not. It doesn't take that long for that stuff to break down, and the worms are just finishing it off. So if you're using material that's already broken down kind of in your worm bin as kind of your sort of like your base material or your base bedding material, you can harvest very frequently and harvest more each time. But if you're using just shredded cardboard, shredded paper with food waste, especially that shredded cardboard stuff is going to take a little bit longer to break down. And so what you're going to find is, like, you can easily get to a point where you start seeing a lot more of that undigested material in your harvest if you're harvesting frequently and harvesting a lot. So I hate to give you a number. It depends on what you're harvesting. I will tell you that I have a user that gets about a gallon a week out of the bottom of her urban worm bag, but she uses a lot of leaf mold. So that's what she uses, that leaf mulch stuff. So anyway, sorry to ramble there. Yeah, so Ryan said he harvested his worm castings, split his bin now into 2 bins because his bin was wet. It was tough to sift, and he's got a lot of worms. So yeah, when you've got a wet worm bin, you're going to have a lot of worms in that vermicompost, and it's going to be hard to sift. And so it's a double whammy there because it's hard to sift, and it's got a lot of worms in it. So moisture control is key. All right, my voice is getting tired, Troy. You go ahead and take one.
Yeah, I was going to. So Ryan also asked, and I'm a little confused what he means. Can I feed my worm casting tote like I would my worm bin to get straggler worms? So I'm guessing he means he has his finished castings in a separate one, and he wants to put food on the top to maybe get them to come up and then trap them.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do that. Some people use like those strawberry what do you call them? The little things that you get strawberries in because they're like a basket. And so you can put food stuff in there, kind of bury it into your bin, and then the worms will go into the basket, and then you can collect that or some type of thing like that. A lot of people will use something like that. You're basically kind of making a trap where you're putting a food source in, getting something that really attracts the worms to come in, and then grabbing them and pulling them out of there.
Yeah. The other thing, Ryan, and it is that you can do is spray, just mist the top of your vermicompost and then lay like bubble wrap on top of it. And the worms love the condensation. They love that moisture, and it's going to act like a magnet up to the top. And then you can just sort of scrape off the top ½ inch, which is going to, of course, have a lot of worm castings, but it's going to have probably the preponderance of worms that you have in there too. Let's see here.
Jay asks, Jay said he had a couple parasol mushrooms, and he said he uses mulched leaves as bedding. Do you guys have any feedback on how to keep the fungi thriving? Well, they need a food source, they need moisture, and they need a little bit of oxygen. So as long as they have those 3 things, food source is going to be anything brown. Leaf matter especially helps fungi to grow. That's a huge food source in the wild. In a forest system, you've got leaves everywhere on the ground. So, and then in also this whole thing, we're always trying to mimic nature. So in a natural setting, you've got the leaf litter layer that's, rather thick, where this kind of top layer is a little bit dry, but once you peel those up, these lower levels are really moist. So that's where the worm's at. They're working on that stuff. And so we want to mimic that in our bins, just make sure and keep that stuff moist.
Cool.
What's the difference between red wiggler castings and backyard earthworm castings? Maybe the look of them. They might be a little bit different structure. Otherwise, they should contain similar nutrients, minerals, and biology.
Yeah, the one thing here is that there's probably not that much difference between the castings, but there's a big difference in how the worms would behave. So you can't take the backyard earthworms that you get out of your garden soil that are more likely going to be not top dwelling endogeeic worms. You're going to have a tough time culturing them and keeping them happy. They don't like living in close proximity to one another. They won't swarm food the way that you might see with composting worms. So it's the difference between the castings is probably not too much, but you probably can't use those worms to create a lot of castings. You would need an endogeeic, like a red wiggler, Indian blue, European nightcrawler, African nightcrawler in the United States anyway. Those are the most common ones. We got somebody from Bosnia, pretty cool. Do we sell vermicompost? Well, we do commercially sell vermicompost. Yes, if we sell that and the tea. And what we think about the tea, of course, Troy, you're a tea expert. I will just say that I'll just handle this one for you. Tea is awesome. It's a great way to apply a lot of biology using a relatively small amount of vermicompost. So you're going to take that vermicompost, you're going to put it in water in a very tightly meshed bag. You're going to agitate the water. You might even add a food source, and you're just going to explode the biology and then apply that biology on your plants. So yeah, we highly recommend tea around here.
I have a podcast, just a quick break, interruption. I have a podcast called What's Brewing, a compost podcast. It's a 10-episode series that goes through from making quality high biology compost to making a brewer to brewing to using, applying, and even keeping soil biology alive afterwards. If you want to check that out, it's on Spotify, iTunes. You should be able to find it online if you Google my name and What's Brewing, a compost podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got plenty of information on our site as well, on the Urban Worm Company site.
Yep. John Cole asks about in a tower system, would it work to start a level, meaning a tray, with just bedding, pre-composted material, and worms, and then leave them until the castings are complete? So the point of those tray systems, John, is that the worms kind of sort of finish one, and this is in theory how they work. They finish one and then move up to the next one that's got fresher material, and then you would add fresher material to maybe the next tray, and then the worms make their way up, and then eventually you just take that bottom tray out. You could do that in some sort of a batch method, I suppose, but I mean, really, the batch method, and just to explain what I mean by this, a batch method would be like you've got this set. Just think like a 5-gallon bucket, and the worms can't escape it. And you just put material in there, let the worms work it until the worms are done working it all. And then you harvest it. That's essentially what you're mimicking with that. You could do that, John. It just sort of defeats the point of having a tray, a tray system. So let's see here.
Someone said, is it necessary to test pH level of your worm bin and try to maintain a certain range? If so, is there testing kits you would recommend? I think Steve's in the same opinion as me, but maybe not. I believe that if you're maintaining your worm bin exactly like we're recommending, making sure that you're keeping a balance of browns to green, making sure that it's moist but not too moist, you really shouldn't have to test pH. And I've never tested, I don't think I've ever tested pH on a compost, maybe a long, long time ago when I was first starting out, just to play around with it. But you shouldn't have to. If you're getting smelly, nasty, gross stuff, you may want to check it to see how acidic it is. But if you're getting to the point where you think you need to test it, you probably need to remedy that anyway. If you're remedying it, then what's the point of testing?
You fix the problem.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's Have a Revolution on YouTube is asking. I've read this. He or she is asking about moisture content. The 60% is good for vermicomposting, but then wetter for breeding bins. So breeding bins meaning if you're trying to do vermiculture. I do believe that that's true. I don't know if 90% is the number. I will just say that as a rule of thumb, you want to be between 60 and 70% for vermicomposting. The issue, there's a lot of issues with moisture. One of the issues is that, one of the issues is if it's too moist, then you possibly can go anaerobic in a worm bin, especially a deeper worm bin. But if you're using like breeding bins, like those shallow trays, then yes, you want something wet, but it's unlikely to go anaerobic because those things are so shallow. There's very little area for them to go kind of anaerobic on you. So I'll just try to answer this question quickly. Yes, you want a wetter environment for vermiculture than you want for vermicomposting. And if you're going to screen the vermicompost at the end, that you want it even drier than that. If you want to you can get down to 50% where the stuff is a little bit tacky, but doesn't totally stick to itself like it does in that 60 to 70% range. That's better for screening and separating. So it's kind of depends on what stage your worm bin is in. So those numbers you said they're Revolution are about correct. 60 to 70% for vermicomposting, higher than that for vermiculture. Carmen is asking if she puts her finished castings in a bucket, how long should she keep them in order for any cocoons to hatch? So if you've got cocoons in your finished castings that just didn't make it out in the screening process, if they are viable cocoons, they will hatch within 21 days. So I would wait maybe at least that long and then try to bait them out with any, bait out those little babies with any, like as we talked about, like maybe spraying the top of a worm bin and then putting like bubble wrap and then just kind of scraping off the top to get most of those worms out of there. So let's see here. So Troy, if you want to check, do you have a link that you can post for your tea podcast?
Yeah, I'll find it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Uncle D's says that bus pans are great batch worm bin, things, and he's talking about those like busing tray, the bus boys at table that they put dishes and stuff into at a restaurant. Somebody comes around, cleans off the table. Those are nice, decently sized, easy to carry trays that aren't terribly deep. They might be about 6 inches deep or so, and those do make good batch method worm bins. They also make good breeder bins, really, too, because they're kind of nice and shallow, so you're not wasting that space. You could, of course, do a breeder bin in a big 18-gallon Rubbermaid bin that's 18 inches deep, but you're just wasting the vertical space there. So yeah, Troy's finding the link to that podcast. I will also say, if you just go to urbanwormcompany.com and search for worm tea, we've got a whole thing on, or compost tea. We've got a whole bunch of stuff that Troy wrote last year on compost tea. It's some really, really good information. Trying to be the leading source of compost tea information on the interwebs here. Kim Bolton is here. Kim is in Maryville, Tennessee, owns a verma farm. She's a very sweet lady. She's piping in. Kim is one of my probably earliest adopters of the urban worm bag. Kim manages her moisture so well that, and I don't know if it's still the case, the first version of the urban worm bag only had the zipper at the bottom. Didn't even line or zipper. It was a terrible design. I'm going to go ahead and say it right now. Her moisture control was so good that she was using version 1 worm bags way after everybody else's zippers had basically broken because of the moisture. So she is let me get to her, what her input is Kim recommends, after sifting, to add back any woody material that you have left over, 1 to 2 inch chunks of wood chips. So Kim does have a very fungal, I believe she uses a lot of rabbit manure with wood chips is her primary, what she primarily vermicompost. So thanks for piping in, Kim. And she's absolutely right that if you've got that woody material, it's already being worked by the worms, or by the bacteria, well, by the fungi, most likely. So you're putting in very fertile material right back in. That stuff is not a waste material. That stuff should go right back into your bin after you've sifted it out. That's great input. So
I put a link for iTunes, and I just added a link to Spotify. One of them's episode 1, one of them's episode 2, but you should be able to find the other episodes on there.
Okay. Dan asked if we have a video on the use of leaf mold for worm bins. We don't have a video on that, Dan. I suppose I could. It'd be easy enough to set up a bin that's like an all leaf mold bin and see what it looks like versus food waste. That'd be an excellent YouTube series to do. It might take a little while as to get, to process some of that leaf mold first, so I can give you a good side by side. But yeah, that's a good point. YouTube, I love YouTube. It just takes forever for me to edit edit a video. So that's really what restricts my ability to get a lot of content out. So Carmen asks if it's okay to get Troy's soil test from Canada. I believe you can. We'll have to check and see about the shipping dirt into the US. That's the problem, is can you do that without getting in some trouble? But we could if you can get the test to us, and Carmen, go ahead and get in touch via email. You can just email me at steve@urbanwormcompany.com, and we'll see if we can do that for you. Let's see here. And I think we're going to start wrapping it up here. But Robert there in Bosnia is saying, talking about storing, keep quality vermicastings tea for commercial purposes. Okay, this is a tough question. How to keep microbes alive for a while in order to sell as a liquid fertilizer in a bottle. And I don't know that when people figure this stuff out, it's often proprietary. They don't. I don't know how this stuff gets stabilized, but if you're doing like an aerated compost tea that has just massive biology in it, you're going to lose a ton of that very, very quickly. I think an extract is going to be a more stable liquid. Is that
Correct. Yeah.
there?
Yeah. And when people are
So,
bottling stuff, it's generally just one or a few select species that they're able to keep alive. Whereas when we're brewing a compost tea, we've got lots of different types of things that we're trying to keep high populations of.
cool. Well, I tell you what, we've been at it an hour. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. I think we had a great showing today. We almost had 100 people on at one time. I saw it ticking up to 98.
99.
Like, we're gonna get there, and then we didn't. Yeah, I know. So let's wrap it up here. Troy, you'll send out an email to our email subscribers about what's coming up next week. If you're not on our email list, go ahead and head over to urbanwormcompany.com. Wait for that annoying pop-up, and then we'll send you some email, some good free information on vermicomposting, and then you'll get notified of any sales we have and discounts and whatnot. But then also we'll let you know when all of these YouTube videos are coming out. We do this every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and so we have a lot of fun with this. So anyway, do you have anything did you want to talk about for next week, Troy, or have we figured out next week's topic?
Not exactly. Like I said, I'm in limbo right now with moving, and I've been dealing with a whole bunch. I haven't really thought about next week's topic yet, but we'll have something good, and I'll announce it right away through social media. Cool. So, yeah, I usually try to mention that as well. If you don't follow our social media, we make announcements through Instagram, Facebook about upcoming shows or other YouTube videos, things like that. Someone I just wanted to mention real quick. Someone said they don't see Kim's comments. So this goes live on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you're not seeing some of the comments, it's because you may be on Facebook and it's going out on YouTube. So you may want to switch over to the other platform and see if you see the comment there, if it's something that you want to check out. Yeah. So we're simulcasting this. So yeah, Kim was here on Facebook. So anyway. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. We will see you next week. See you later. Right. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.